Welcome back here with Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about how you can deal with the regrets in life. This is a request I received, and I'm not going to frame it in the fashion of, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, but more so if I were to impart knowledge, if I had a son one day, how I would advise them, shepherd them to approach the world. As a parent, this is crucial. With girls, you can't be overly protective and shelter too much because they'll revolt and totally screw their life up. With boys, by let's say 12 or 13 years of age, you need to be setting them up to conquer the world, not playing catch up, not being unassuming, too nice, because they'll be taken advantage of. So let them have innocence in childhood, but also gradually be releasing that information to their benefits. My parents, they were tradcons, but also with a libertarian vein. So, and this is common with boomers. I'm not doing it like, oh, this is terribly unique. Where if they had to struggle to learn something, they're not always forthcoming about helping you avoid that. They might say, you got to do the same, which at times it could be beneficial, but in other cases, you're going to waste tons of money and effort and potentially miss out because you didn't know. And sure, you could be given the advice and you rebel, but at least you would have the information at some point, and a certain percentage will choose to take it. So, from younger ages, remaining in competitive sports, I believe, is very significant. It builds your understanding of hierarchy, of cooperation, of teamwork, as cringe as that sounds. Doing well in school to where you might be able to attain a scholarship, but not being to the extent that you don't have some of the nice experiences that are restricted to certain ages, right? Having friends, becoming comfortable, especially the boys, with the opposite sex, not having this mentality. And oftentimes, tradcon parents do this. They won't have an issue with you watching, Black Hawk Down, where you've got field surgery, or The Patriots, wherein the Care Bear British guy is being stabbed in the throat by Mel Gibson. But then, oh my gosh, this James Bond movie, there's implied nudity. You better not watch it. I think a balance is crucial because it does move forward. If you have the social calibration, or at least the ability to ape neurotypicality once you're heading off to college, you are going to be at a massive advantage compared to those who are overanalyzing, over romanticizing. It's night and day. Tying in there from a health standpoint, ensuring they have a diet which is rich in meat and eggs, not excessive sugar, no vegan nonsense, potentially looking at HGH as a possibility to ensure that in high school and certainly as they move on to university, they're ready to go. They're strong, they're confident, high energy levels. I would argue college is still well worth your time, providing you have the appropriate approach. That means go for 4 years, don't transfer in because you want to be able to maximize opportunities and see it. It is a vacation, but it's a strategic vacation that can set you up for the next decade. People who are too obsessed with the partying, they miss this. Those who are fixated on, I've got to get good grades, I've got to have a nice GPA and transcript, that can also be detrimental. So, what I would have done, because I was active in groups and I did pretty well as a student, but I would have put far more emphasis on building relationships. So, try to get into a business program at a good school. Be part of the business oriented fraternities, the young investors groups. This might expose you to stuff like, who knows, Bitcoin, Tesla at an earlier date. But we'll talk about investing a little bit later in the video because I think there's a little bit too much whinging over it. You might have jumped on a startup. That's probably a better option where you could see yourself escalate in terms of opportunities and resources far sooner if it plays out. Take opportunities to study abroad if you can. I think that's definitely beneficial. If you can get into some kind of interdisciplinary program, honors, whatnot, that's also good, assuming you want to go to graduate school, you want to pursue the professional route, but really looking for those possibilities and not seeing it as I'm just here as a maximum individual trying to have a good scorecard. Also recognizing that college is one of the hands down best environments you'll ever be in during your existence to forge romantic connections. So being prepared for that, not second guessing too much. Well, should I take too long? Just go with it. And some will say you're trying to normie explain, this is outdated. Yeah, we hear stories, but on a grand scale, they're relatively isolated. A lot of people are linking up. And if you're lucky, you might find someone who's a long term prospect. But if you get through college and you haven't done that, it becomes far more difficult because you are seldom going to come across that sort of concentration. As far as once you graduate, and in a way I could have stated on the previous slide, I did have the opportunity. I kind of wish my parents had pushed this more so. I could have gone to university in Europe, paid a fraction of the cost. Obviously, housing would have potentially been a burden, but probably still cheaper, and just done my degree there in English, despite that not being the dominant language of that country. Probably done a master's degree as well. Once you're in Europe, of course, it's easy to explore Europe. Or if you want to go someplace like Morocco, it's relatively cheap. You've got the airlines, you have Europass, you have other possibilities, and it forces you to grow up faster, which I think is valuable. If you're not innately a super outgoing person, it's beneficial. But let's say that's not a real possibility. Stuff like moving to a large city for a couple of years upon graduation, or even if you are going the trades route, if you can get a union in a city, you want to do some work there. The reason being that, once more, it's a challenge, but you have so many more opportunities to interact. You've got the metro, you've got the bus, you've got the line at the coffee shop, if there's some kind of a meeting between offices, that sort of thing. There's many times I've had even a match on a dating app, but it's been a logistical nightmare trying to drive there because women will jet off to Bali in a heartbeat, but they don't want to drive like an hour for a normie. They'll do that for chat, I'm sure. I'm just trying to explain. If you're in a hub where you can easily jump on a train, do some reading, do some research, go see one, you're going to have far better options. Even if you don't have a ton, it's going to be much easier than having to huff it in a car and deal with it. Because being on the road now is extraordinarily dangerous, more than it's ever been, at least in my experience. A related possibility would be you could join the military, and that comes with a lot of benefits if you're trying to see the world, garner some skills, get locked into a solid career, get money for education, tax-free disability pension. I did attempt to do that. It was just the medical thing that kicked me back, but I might try starting 2025. I may attempt. I'm not sure if the reserves are worth it or National Guard, because if you don't get adequate deployments, would you even be able to qualify for certain things down the road? But I'm going to check it out to see if anything has shifted in terms of those requirements. And now we can talk about finance. Most people go, Tesla, Bitcoin, Nvidia, Apple, I should have done it. That's great. Now, assuming you don't have a time machine to go back with the knowledge you possess today to actually invest, even if you were to hit the reset button, you were back there with your existing knowledge and friends and associations, would you do it? Or would you play out in a roughly similar fashion? So the guy that I met in El Salvador, he lives kind of close to me, not so much, but he didn't go to college. Him and his buddy, they went out to the West, bought some land, grew a particular substance, shipped it illegally to where they lived, made a lot of money, and he bought Bitcoin early on to where it was, I think, a piece of paper with a QR code or something similar. It helped him. He had an easier late 20s and early 30s. He was able to buy a house for himself, but you could tell he wasn't mega loaded. It wasn't, okay, I never have to work again. In fact, he was talking about he was pushing 40 and he was discussing learning a trade because he needed more income. So it could be this investment was good to an extent. Maybe you sold it at 20,000 or 30,000 because it's the peak and then it's going to crash, it'll be worthless. There were people, like I have coworkers, had 3 or 4 Bitcoin. I didn't think it was going to do anything. Or one guy claimed to have 75, or maybe it was 25. And he's like, well, I figured it wasn't going to do nothing. So you might not have held it long enough if you're very impulsive. Another problem would be like, hell, the guy had 10,000 Bitcoin traded for a pizza. He'd be a billionaire now, if my math is correct. Or you potentially lost your passcode. There were some folks that put money into an exchange, maybe it was like 7 to 10 years ago, GovX, Mount Gov, something of that nature, and it collapsed, it got hacked. So they lost their money if you weren't using cold storage. But did you even know about cold storage if you bought it kind of in a haphazard fashion? So you really have to be a survivor to have lasted 10 plus years, keeping it secure, never selling, and actually buying enough at the time to where you'd be in a good condition. That's why my point is all this lamentation, you're wasting time because you don't know if you would have done anything differently. And you're missing out while you're dwelling on that, you're missing out on existing possibilities. Tesla, just since the 26th of November, has gone up $100 a share. We have stuff like Rocket Lab. You have Palantir, which people say now is expensive, but no guarantees here. But if it does what people think, Palantir could very well be another Apple in the future or Nvidia. So there are people who are not going to buy now because they say it's too expensive, and they're going to be like, "Oh, I should have bought it." Or like myself, I bought Apple like 10 years ago, correct? Did very well. It's one of my best investments. But then you could go and say, oh, I should have put even more money into Apple. There's always regrets people have. But the bigger issue is how are you going to move forward? Let me tell you one that's recent. Since Maloney became PM in Italy, not saying that's decisive, just trying to frame it. Many of these, they're called pigs, Spain, Italy funds. They're up like 30+%. So what, 15 or so average to a year? Not too bad. That math is probably wrong though. And the Greek fund, GREK, Greece, which is a joke of a country anyway, is up 100% in 2 years. This is not genius tier stuff. It's not a hidden penny stock. It's, oh, I just put my money there. When I was first getting a Coinbase account, everyone was talking about Ripple. Ripple has the best business use case. It's going to replace Swift potentially as a financial system. And that's the way that you really want to be flowing your money. Well, I have a decent chunk of Ripple. If Ripple hits 1,000, I do well. If Ripple hits 10,000 or 35,000, I do extraordinarily well. Is it going to happen? I'm not banking on it. The point being, there's going to be folks, if it does do that, they'll say, oh, I should have bought Ripple. If you feel like you missed the boat on Bitcoin, you can always DCA into it. And I would suggest doing it. Maybe not all your money, but enough to where you have a chunk. In my case, if it hits 1 million, I'll do all right. If it hits 10 mil, do quite well. If it hits 42, which is a little bit more conservative top, I'll do extraordinarily well. And if it now, the Fidelity guys said 1 billion a coin, that's probably a cope in our lifetimes. But again, do you want to be potentially have a stake or not? That's why I try to explain to people. You are missing out on what's going on now because you think you lost everything. And that's not a healthy attitude to have. So focus more on what's in control. When you hear some of these guys that are BP or Wignat adjacent to the BP and they go, it's all a scam. You can't make any money. You should just be a parasite and become fat and eat garbage. I'm like, these are self-sabotaging morons. We have cartoon meme coins going up 1,000, 7,000%, and oh, there's no way to make money. There's no way to get ahead. Just again, you can't help these folks, but those of you who are interested, you can definitely benefit yourself. Not in a haphazard fashion. Honestly, my biggest regret financially is none of these names, truth be told. My biggest regret, because I've done some speculation in the past, sometimes it's worked out very well, other times not so much. Sometimes you buy it and it does really well, but you want to wait for lower tax rates on a long-term trade, and then it goes down. My biggest regret is not just consolidating in broad-based funds like VTI and SCHD, because you might not make tons, but you'll have a healthy return sans inflation, and you're not going to lose anything you initially put in. That's what I'm saying. And much more peace of mind. You're not always stressed out, oh, this, that, the other. By the way, even if you think it's all about crypto in the future, most of these companies, Tesla has bought Bitcoin, obviously MSTR dumped billions into Bitcoin. So these major companies on the funds, on the indexes, they're going to benefit from crypto one way or the other. You just hope crypto doesn't collapse or end up in a rug pool. They're going to do well. So don't fixate so much. Just be consistent and don't be like, oh, I missed this, therefore it's over. That's not a healthy attitude to have. All right, that's done with my speech and soapbox. Finally, we can talk about the spiritual angle. Are there regrets there? So about 2 years ago, I took it upon myself to investigate Catholicism more so because I felt I've been unfair to them. I just maybe don't know enough. I did really enjoy studying Aquinas way back in the day. So I decided to watch some videos by Trent Horn, who at least in that era was trad cath adjacent. He seemed like a level-headed dude. Recently, he's become extraordinarily soyified. It seems to me that many Catholics, and you could say this of almost all religions, they're more obsessed with what happens to the church. Like, is the church strong? Is the church thriving? Because we are not of this world. But the world around, the consequences for people, for countries, they'll act as not a big deal. In fact, they'll say you're going to hell if you try to take a hard line on these issues. I've interacted with too many different cultures and I've traveled enough to say there's some people and there's some ideas I don't want anywhere near me. And certainly if I had a family, I don't want them in proximity, period. What I will say, laying aside the benefits from a spiritual perspective, which I've talked about before in the God Pill video, I'm not going to rehash them here per se. The benefits of going to a church is kind of like I said with college, the networking. You meet people. If you have a good reputation, it can lead to business opportunities. Certainly, if you want to find a long term partner, this is assuming that your church has the appropriate demographics. There's a better chance of locking that in early because once you get past really the age of 25, it's not impossible, but it's increasingly more difficult just because a lot of individuals are set in their ways or they've already been taken by others. So I think seeing it that way and preferably with consistency, because if you just show up, okay, and now it's time for me to change my life, that is not necessarily going to be the best received by the audience, by the congregation. So I would say you don't necessarily want to adopt it to the extent that it prevents you from seeing things clearly in the world. You don't want to completely reject the world and then take this path where you're a poverty cell just because you think that's what the church wants you to do. But you can definitely benefit from that environment, whether it makes you a better person, it's encouraging, it improves, if you think spirituality is a thing, it enhances that. But it also has the fringe benefits of who you're around, who you're talking to, and who you may be able to forge something with on the long run. So that's going to be my take. If anyone has regrets, you can mention them, but preferably if you have a regret, how did you learn from that and turn it into something better? We don't need to sit here, keep talking, well, this, well, that. Look, we all have them, but it's more so if I'm in this situation again, because I do have the knowledge, I don't have to be building a time machine, but if I come across it, what will I do?